There are lots of things historically and contemporaneously that we have in common. Europe and Russia, for example. And so what we've tried to do, we've had a series of 5 conferences at a very high level. Many important statesmen from both Russia and Europe have been involved. The first one was in Moscow in 2012, and there was one in Vienna later on that year in 2012. We've had them in Paris at UNESCO, we've had them in Moldova, various places. And these 5 conferences have been about finding what binds us together and trying to focus on that rather than focusing on the immediate causes of conflict. And this has been very interesting. The latest one was just a month and a bit ago in Vienna at the Diplomatic Academy of Vienna on the theme Eurasia and Europe Dialogue, Building Trust, Security and Cooperation for Sustainable Development. Again, a whole raft of issues where we have so much to build in common, where the rest of the world needs Europe and Russia to work together to help to sustain or bring peace in the rest of the world. Ironically, the whole thing with Syria has come up since that time. I'm not sure that's the best example. That's not the sort of thing we had in mind, but if it helps to bring Russia and Europe and America together, it may have some positives to it. Anyway, Russia has taken this very seriously. When we had the conference in Vienna at the United Nations in 2012, President Putin, well, we had 2 fully fledged Russian ambassadors who were sent by the government. One you'd expect, the ambassador in Vienna and the ambassador to the UN in Vienna, but also we had the top roving ambassador of the Russian government was sent by the Russian government to take part in the conference, to give an address, to take part in discussions, so on and so forth. So this has been recognized at a very high level by the Russian government, and we've had then put our way many of their top experts from the Russian Academy of Sciences and other things. Of course, they have an interest in this. We're not totally naive. But the mere fact that we could bring them to the table, there could be real discussions between former defense ministers of Europe and people from Russia, that we could hear each other's point of view. This is already progress in terms of what's happening on other levels in the relationship. So of course it's not a finished work. We can't say tangible results have yet come, but we have had very good soundings from the other side, had lots of feedback from Europe that this is a very good thing to be doing, and other people could usefully get involved in it as well. So this is one thing that happened recently in UPF in Europe. I also want to explain a little bit about the Balkans, because we all know the sad history, particularly during the 1990s. You had in the early 90s, you had the atrocities in Srebrenica and in the sort of the western part there, just where you see Croatia and Bosnia, that area there, Sarajevo, that area was a very fraught area in world terms. Terrible things going on, all the great powers involved. There was, if you remember, we ended up bombing Serbia. I was just in Belgrade a few weeks ago, and I saw still the bridges that are down that were bombed during that time. We forget about these things very easily, but actually, they leave a mark. And there's no open conflict so much anymore in the Balkans, but there's lots of residue from the West Balkans conflict of the 90s, and also, of course, the Kosovo-Serbia war, effectively, in the late 1990s, 1997, I think it was. Kosovo became an independent state. UPF has worked very closely with Kosovo, with the government of Kosovo, to try to inject our principles into government policy. It's fraught because it's not just a European thing. There's a whole long history of problems on the Balkans with, the Turks invaded in the 1500s and almost got to Vienna, and then there were clashes between Muslims and Christians for the last 500 years, and there's a long history, not as deep as the Middle East in terms of bad history, but pretty deep. And
also worth remembering, Kosovo is Slav.
Kosovo is what?
Slav. So you've got the Slav Empire there, and that's the
right. Although Kosovo is mainly ethnically mainly Albanian, with some Serbian population. Anyway, there's lots of aftermath, which, if not dealt with, will not either there won't be healing, or potentially it could reignite into open conflict. So we were fortunate, again, Father Moon himself, when he came in 2005, he was here in 2005, if you remember, but also he went throughout the Balkans. He was in Sarajevo, and he put his fingers into the bullet holes in the buildings, and he turned them around, and he said, "Oh yes, just like North during the Korean War." He really resonated with him very deeply, and he said, "We must do something to bring lasting peace in the Balkans." And so he went there in 2005. He met many heads of state and government. This is Alfred Moisey, who's a very close ambassador for peace of UPF now, who we managed to arrange a meeting with him in Tirana, or near Tirana. That's the Prime Minister at the time, Salih Berisha. And he met other heads of state as well. And he initiated the Balkan Peace Initiative. And anyway, to cut the very long story short, about $1 million was invested in many projects, a lot of peace education, lots of good things were done. But sustaining momentum in these things is not always easy. So we felt recently that we needed to have a relaunch. And so actually November the 1st and 2nd, I think it was, I can't remember, no, 21st and 22nd, we had a European Leadership Conference in the Balkans to commemorate the 10th anniversary of Father Moon's initiation of this peace initiative, and also to carry it forward. And the idea is, first of all, in the lower part of the Balkans, the South Balkans, centering on the Kosovo problem, to highlight the difficulties there and the need for continued peace efforts there. And then we will have another conference next year, I don't know when, the spring or the summer sometime, in the West Balkans. And together these will reinitiate the Balkan Peace Initiative. This conference was on mutual understanding and cooperation for peace, security and human development in the Balkans, and a lot of it was about having an inter-religious peace council for the whole Balkan area, because as I said, religious conflict underlies so much of the conflict in the Balkans between Islam and Christianity, and also some other religious conflicts as well. And we were able to have we had a Serbian, one of the top Serbian Orthodox Church experts in interfaith came, and also I'm sure our Sheikh here, he probably knows him well, the Grand Mufti of Serbia, Yusuf Spajic, came, which was a great thing as well, and also other religious leaders from the region. The idea is to make a religious peace council to make sure that the religions in the Balkans cooperate towards bringing peace. That's the essential idea. That's the most important way we will carry forward this initiative. And these are just some of the sessions. Father and Mother Moon's son, a daughter-in-law, the president of the Women's Federation, was there. Alfred Moisey, who was president 7 or 8 years ago, was there speaking. Same with Fatmir Seju, president of Kosovo, who's been ambassador for peace for many years. Walter Schwimmer, some of you may know as former Secretary General of the Council of Europe. Many eminent people there to help to get this off to a new start. So that's something to look forward to next year and subsequent years. And there's many ways from Britain we can help to sustain that. I just also want to mention about Africa and work with Africa. There are many people of African descent here, origins, and we have worked for a long time at the UN with the African Union and other African delegations. We have many ambassadors at the UN who are African, who are ambassadors for peace. And Ban Ki-moon has been very supportive, and he usually comes to Africa Day, which we hold in our premises, and the UN tranships, brings their stuff to the Manhattan Center, which we own and run, where they can have this festival of cultures and food and dance and whatever, but also very serious discussion, speech every year from Ban Ki-moon. And this year, Ban Ki-moon actually didn't come himself. You can see he managed to put Universal Peace Federation on the dais there, as well as the African Union. This was last year, but this year we had Jan Eliasson, who's also, we know here in Europe and Sweden, eminent former foreign minister and diplomat, probably Sweden's best known one, who's now the Deputy Secretary General of the UN, Deputy to Ban Ki-moon. Ban Ki-moon couldn't come this year, he was on world tour. So Jan Eliasson came, and I'd already spoken to Jan Eliasson several years ago at a private event about UPF, and he said, I'd love to come to something. And then I only heard about it afterwards when he had come. So. Anyway, we are building relationships with the UN in many ways, on many levels. We are in ECOSOC. We've got our ECOSOC status approved again about a year and a half ago, and with a special commendation, without any opposition at all. And we're working with, we now have an MOU memorandum with the Alliance of Civilizations. UPF was largely responsible for the new move in the UN towards interfaith being an integral part of the UN. Father Mooney gave a speech there, and then they didn't go with the Interreligious Council. 1 minute, yeah. They didn't go with the Interreligious Council yet because of the reasons that people mentioned this morning, because Security Council is too liable to stamp on these things, but there's a long-term plan to get that in place. One of the plan is to get an interfaith department, which was already established under another ambassador for peace, who was also Deputy Secretary General, Ashiro Zingiro from Tanzania, about 8 or 9 years ago. And there is a Department of Interfaith Affairs. Interfaith is an integral part of celebrations at the UN now, which it wasn't 10 or 15 years ago. And we see that going from strength to strength. So we want to support the UN in every way that we can. And of course, introduce the kind of values we've been talking about this morning into the UN more than it is already. The UN has got many great points, but it also has many weaknesses, which anyone who's worked there will tell you. And we need to, the civil society world generally needs to inject its values so that the UN can become a much stronger, much more realistically peace-oriented organization. That's part of our mission statement of UPF.